till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Turn us to thousands, and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon. Turn us to thousands, and on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
All right, testing. I know I'm probably pretty laggy right now. Um, yeah, so before I dive into all the technical difficulties, um, glad to be back. Glad whoever's in the chat in the on the stream. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Please ignore the laggy video. So I obviously haven't streamed for a couple months, and so I was getting everything set up. Thought an hour would be enough, and figured out a bunch of problems. Had some issues with OBS, had some issues with my virtual environment, my WSL and my Python virtual environment. For whatever reason, I have to basically recompile Python from source code. And so I'm doing that right now, hence why you see, well, you may not see, but at the bottom here in the terminal, it's running a bunch of load tests. So that's why, hopefully the audio is not too choppy, but that's why the video is very choppy. But I figured it's be better just to go live versus have you guys just kind of sit there and watch, that starting soon screen. So while we let this compile and run through its tests, how's everyone doing? For those that are here, hey Nick, how are you doing? Glad to see you back for sure. Yeah, how's everyone going? It's been, like I said, I think April maybe, which I guess that'd be 3 months. It's been about 3 months since I last streamed, and there's been a lot that's happened over the 3 months, and we're gonna dive into it a little bit. So this stream will be a little bit of a little more of a discussion in the beginning, and then we'll dive into some coding here, probably about 30 minutes in or so. But yeah, let this, I guess, hopefully this will finish up soon, because I hate seeing the video being laggy. And I'm sure it's very annoying for those that are watching, especially if you're watching the VOD of this, it's probably pretty crappy. But yeah, I guess while we wait for this, anyone have anything that want to bring up in the chat while we wait here? It's almost done, so we'll dive into my DevNet Expert, the 2 attempts that I took at it. I'll talk through the experience. Definitely, I'll field any questions without obviously breaking any NDA. Obviously, I won't be breaking that, so don't ask like, "Hey, what was on the test? Can you give me something specific?" I won't be doing that. So, hey, Oscar, how are you doing? But I will go over everything. I'll go over what I can. I'll go over everything from, like I said, the expert was my first expert level exam. The DevNet Expert was my first expert level exam. And so there was a lot that I had to take in, especially on that first attempt. So we'll go over that here shortly. Nick says, I'm all right. I've been hitting the dev core pretty hard. I think I'm going to make another go at it soon, maybe within a week or so. Oh, sweet. Yeah, that dev core, I think I saw, I've been in and out of the Discord recently, and yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I know you failed the first attempt, but it's definitely worth going after. Like I said, it took me 2 times. I think the first time it stuns a lot of people, just because that's the first exam, at least for me, that like really shifted my mindset, not away from network engineering, but more in the software development mindset, if that makes sense. Oh, it's all right, Nick. Nick says, sorry you failed both attempts. No, trust me, I'm okay with it. I put in, obviously didn't put in enough, but I felt that I made some pretty good attempts at it. And it'll come over time. I mean, you just got to roll with the punches. There's really nothing I can do at this point. I've already kind of set my path, especially this summer and then into the fall for sure, with some personal, my personal life. So it's going to have to be on the back burner for a bit. But yeah, it's it sucks I failed, but at the same time, I learned a lot through both of those attempts. And yeah, I definitely had a good time with it. I mean, I really did. Everything from the streams to taking the tests and realizing my shortcomings and then going back. And I definitely improved. Like I said, I think I put in the blog post as well. I improved on the one section that I really failed. I bombed on the first attempt. So I felt that I did better. The problem was I didn't really do that much better in the other sections, which I needed to do to pass. So be it. Nick says, been doing a lot of reading and the dev core study guide. That's been helpful. Also looking up details on these Cisco application hosting and UCS methods. Yeah, dude, UCS, Intersight, dude. I think one stream we talked about like something that we don't like doing. I think it was about databases or something like that. I forget what the conversation was, but yeah, UCS, the Unified Computing, Intersight. I know collaboration is not really touched on besides WebEx, but all of that stuff, man, that ain't me. That's if you want to call out a weak point, like that's something I'm just like, like I don't want to deal with that. So, oh, it looks like the tests are about done. Like I said, I apologize that I got started a little late, but I figured it'd be better to go live on like a laggy video versus just like you let it wait there on that starting soon screen, so that way we can start talking. So to provide, like I said, a little more insight in this specific problem and what's going on. So for whatever reason, I don't know if there's a symlink or something, but any virtual. So I created all my system installations of Python for whatever reason are sharing all their packages. So hold on. Okay, hopefully my audio is not too choppy. I'm noticing my video is just like dropping, but yeah, for whatever reason, I have like two different versions of Python. I have Python 3.8.5 maybe, and then 3.9 dot something. And for whatever reason, I accidentally installed a bunch of packages in the system installation. I think it was Python 3.8. And then I installed Python 3.9, and somewhere in there was a symlink. It might be a path issue as well, but basically all my Python installations are sharing packages, and they're all outdated. And basically when I create a new virtual environment off of one of those system installs or installations, it bugs out. There's a bunch of incompatibilities. It's saying, hey, you need this when you need that. It's a mess. So I'm basically installing a brand new, fresh version of an updated version of Python. I think it's Python 3.9.13. It's the last patch for 3.9. The reason I'm not doing 3.10 yet is just because I haven't tested my code on it, and I don't want to spend more time troubleshooting. So that's what it's doing now. It's going through compiling process of that, and then I actually have to go through and do a make, actually compile. I think right now it's getting it ready. Honestly, I have to look at the instructions. Let's see. Just catching up here. Nick says Intersight filtering and such. Yeah, Intersight to me too is like one of those things that I understand why it's available, but it's one of those things, and there's other tools that Cisco has where if you don't use it, it's tough to find like a good example, if that makes sense. Like the DevNet sandboxes do a great job, but like specifically like with Intersight, I've never had luck messing around with it. Granted, they may have created a sandbox for it and I just missed it, but I've never had a good experience with Intersight as far as like testing and labbing and whatnot. My struggle with pagination, however you want to say it, is remember the different details between one platform and another, keeping all those things straight. So interesting enough that there is a standard for pagination, like an HTTP standard. I actually had the RFC. I read through the RFC during the expert studies because I wanted to make sure I was like solid on that, just in case it was, for whatever reason, I was just familiar with it, right? I'll tell you a really good API that does well with it is the Firepower Threat Defense, the FTD API. It has a really good pagination, and I believe it uses like all the quote unquote, the RFC standard. So that might be a good one to look at if you're struggling with pagination and you're like, man, I really wish I could just have like a solid example. Check out the FTD API. Did you hear the Sims and Lablets are making a comeback to NA and NP level exams? Supposedly DevNet will see some later this year. Yeah, I saw, it was right before the stream. It was, I think it was Wendell Odom. He tweeted out the blog post, so I just did a quick glance over. As long as they work, I'm cool. I'm cool with them. Yeah, that should be interesting. It'll be interesting on how they change their study guides. Like if there's anything, or I guess, so for example, right, there's exam guide or the exam topics, and we've talked about this before, where you have to look for specific verbs, right? Like, I forget them now. Like troubleshooting, configuring, those sort of verbs. I'm wondering like how that's going to be if the exam topics will change now, right? Because let's say they want you to configure something, and in the exam topics it doesn't explicitly mention that. Like, will they change the wording? I don't know. Oscar asks, how was your experience with the design portion of the lab? Yeah, so I was hoping that this thing would finish building, but I guess let's just jump right into it. It's been about 20 minutes now, so yeah. So the lab. Well, I'll kind of start out, and I'll get to your question, Oscar. I'm definitely not dodging it in any way. I just want to start from the beginning and kind of roll into it. So, everything from the travel, right, flight, driving to hotel, going to the testing location, being there for all, the whole day. That's an experience in itself. So like, if you're listening to this and you're interested in the DevNet Expert or just any expert level exam, practical exam where you're there for, 8 hours, that don't get overly anxious about that part, right? I think everyone kind of goes through, like when you're boarding a plane, right? Most of the time, like at least in my experience, when I'm going on flights or whatever, it's most likely just something I'm looking forward to. Like there are definitely work trips, but most of the time it's like vacation, seeing a new city or a new town. But then this one, it was like a work trip, but at the same time, like it's like, it's not like a lonely work trip, but like it's just you, right? It's you versus you going at it. So it definitely felt different, traveling to the site. And then once you're, everything from, depending on what time your flight gets in, if you're at the hotel, you got time to waste. Like you don't really want to do too much because you want to kind of keep, stay in the zone. So yeah, I mean, that in itself, for those listening, that's something definitely don't look over. Like if you feel like, oh man, this is like a different feeling I haven't felt before, going to some place to take an 8-hour exam, like you're literally putting yourself through pain. It definitely was a normal feeling. The second time was a little better, but as far as the exam itself, so just so I'm not getting this wrong, and let me actually, I have one more command I gotta run, the alt install. I can just all right. So the exam here, DevNet Expert, exam topics, or no, it was format, lab exam format. I think it'll be easier if I just talk to the format. Let me close out some of this stuff too. All right. Like I said, apologies for everything kind of crumbling here. All right, so we have the 3-hour section, right? The design that Oscar was asking about, and then the 5-hour, which is that second part, which is more, I call it the more practical part. So the design is basically exactly the way it's listed here. I mean, it's 3 hour. You have 3 hours, all web-based, as they mention, and it really is all planning and designing, right? There's no, hey, write a Python script for this, do that, do this. It's just given a scenario, and this isn't any sort of NDA or anything like that, right? Because Hank and the rest of the DevNet Expert team, they went through this in their webinars as there's going to be scenario-based things, right? And I guess it even says it right here. The documentation's email threads, design docs, network topology diagrams, existing code and scripts, right? So you may be asked, like, hey, could you take a look at this code and tell me not what's wrong, but like how could it improve? And it all revolves around all the topics, right? So like I said, you could go through the exam topics again, and you could kind of pick and choose and say, okay, some of them explicitly say configure this, configure that. But yeah, it was pretty much to a T. The design portion, and honestly the design portion I enjoyed. It was kind of weird. After I finished for both exams, right, the design portion I really enjoyed. I finished before the 3 hours expired, and I really enjoyed it. I thought, I was like, man, if we're doing this right now, this is with the grueling pain that everyone talks about. But that's when the 5-hour exam, that 5-hour module hit. And then I was like, all right, I get it now. Oscar asks, how about the Proctor lab environment, lunch, etc.? Well, you hear about lunch. It's definitely nothing crazy. I forget what it even was. It was like a wrap or something like that. I had the same Proctor twice. Because I took it a month apart, so it was kind of funny. I don't think he recognized me the second time around, but I obviously recognized him. The lab environment is just as you would picture. You get your computer. There was no. I can't really. I don't know how much I can actually talk about the environment itself, but I mean, just know you get a chair and you get your own computer. I had dual monitors. I'm sure that's the one positive, and I'm sure they'll share that if they haven't, but that's about it. I mean, there's really nothing else to say about it. But I was surprised with the dual monitors. So, Were the lab instructions clear, easy to understand, intent? Yeah, the lab instructions were pretty clear. Like I said, the design piece, there's definitely an expectation that you've worked with these technologies before, right? So as an example, right, you learn about Git, and you learn about how a project would flow, or how you would, like in the DevNet Associate, I'm pretty sure in the Associate they talk about like creating branches, right? You create branches for features and fixes and whatnot, right? You never just write or do commits right on master branch. That's the whole point of the branching system within Git. So there's like an expectation with the different questions that are asked and stuff that you've worked in that environment before. You've worked in an environment where it's very common for a teammate to say, hey, can you work on this feature? And without instructions, like, hey, I gotta, review the ticket, open up a branch, and start working on my work. And then, so like, that's kind of the expectation. Hopefully that makes sense. So the lab instructions were clear on like where you had to be, but how you got there was a lot of expectation on you've done this before. And not just some of it for sure was like, hey, I've labbed this up so many times and I know how to do it. Others was, others situations where, yeah, I've done this before because I work in a team that does it, right? If that makes sense. So, yeah, but yeah, the reason I'm not trying to dodge any questions. Like I said, I'm trying to provide information and insight, but also obviously under NDA. I'm not trying to pull up any specific examples or anything like that. But yeah, I just the highlight I will say is, and I think it's mentioned in the exam topics themselves, is that you're expected to be, I think it's 5 to 7 years of, I think they call it net DevOps experience, which I think it would be kind of tough at this point. There's definitely jobs out there, right? But to have someone full-time in it, right? Not just like network engineer and then partially working with scripting, right? I think that's a lot of network engineers right now where they like automation and you want to write scripts to accomplish your day-to-day job, but at the same time, you may also be still designing networks, standing up switches and, doing software upgrades, this sort of thing. And don't get me wrong, like, you definitely have to know that stuff. Like, I'm not highlighting over that. It's just that in a net DevOps setting is more like it's part of a bigger picture, if that makes sense, versus like a one-off script. So hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, and then the 5 hours, I mean, it was tough, man. It was tough. Nick asked, but when you're done with a feature and done with it, devs delete that branch. Is it assumed that you don't? I guess you're asking from a more practical standpoint. Yeah, most of the time you delete the branch. Once you merge it into master, it gets deleted. And that's just like a Git. I think it's even on GitHub's page. It's like that's a workflow, is where you would delete the branch upon merge. Or do they say not to delete Git branch? Now, I guess, Nick, you might be looking at it a little too deep. So like a common, and I could say this just from work-related experience, not related to the exam itself. When I ask a teammate, say, hey, like, can you work on this feature or this bug fix or, hot fix, whatever, he'll open a branch and put in the fixes, and then open a pull request. Tests will run against the branch, make sure he didn't, regression testing, and unit testing, all the different testing you learn about with DevCore. And then if everything checks out, manual review, and then merge it into master or main branch. I guess I should say both, master or main branch. You'll see both. And once that merge is put through, a lot of times, even within GitHub, it'll say, do you want to delete the source branch, which is the feature branch that was opened. And most of the time you do. There's really no reason. I could see reasons to keep a branch open just in case you want to go back and add more changes. But a lot of times that's where you would just create a new branch with a new fix, new bug ID and so on. So that way you're not going back in the past and, so hopefully that answers your question. So, but yeah, it really depends on the workflow established at the place you're working. I personally would say delete the branch once it gets merged, and then if there's a bug that you introduce with that branch, then open a new branch, right? And it would be considered a bug fix. So. And that way, like I said, it doesn't get too messy. All right. Yeah, and definitely ask any more questions like that, if anyone has any. So moving on to the like I said, the 5 hours. It's exactly what everything was verbatim off of. If you read through this format and you lab up all the topics described in the exam topics, you'll be solid. There was no surprises. There was no WTF moments, right? The only real feedback, and I mentioned this slightly in the blog, is besides some life priorities taking over here at the end of the year, towards in a few months really. Besides that, there's some things that I do wish happened with this test over time. Obviously, it takes some more people to actually take the exam. So, I took it twice, and I don't know if anyone's taken it twice. So, I want some more people to take it, provide some more feedback to the Cisco learning team. But my biggest thing, especially after taking it the second time, is I kind of hope that I know Hank mentioned in one of the webinars, or the team really, the DevNet Expert team mentioned there was just so much to cover, and there's just not enough time to cover everything within 8 hours. And a lot of people, I think, were oh my gosh, how is that possible? But really, though, I could tell you based on experience, there is not enough time to cover all the topics. It's just, there's just so much. You're bouncing back and forth between all these different tools, different code. It goes from software development to a DSL, like an Ansible, Terraform, Yang, right? You're just going, there's so much context switching. It's just tough to cover everything. Nick's asking, I'm just thinking about how these exams aren't a reflection of real world. Oh, okay. Okay. No, I would say that they are. For the most part. I mean, the thing is, especially when it comes to software development, there are some paradigms and things, kind of not rules. There are guidelines, right, to software development just globally, but a lot of times, the different testing, the development practices, testing, deployment methods, just like a network, right? It's based on the organization, and it's based on, wherever you land, you might be using different platforms, different tooling to do your different code development and deployment. So that's why that's kind of like wraps into what I'm saying with, some improvements, and not improvements might be the wrong word, just as the test matures, right? As it grows older, more people take it. That's kind of where I'm going with it. Is I just I hope to see that it may it's almost trying, in my opinion, it tries to cover almost too much, and I only recognize that after my second attempt, because it really is, there's so much context switching, which I know is popular. That's what you do on a CCI exam. That's just what expert level exams are, right? It's to put you through hell and back. But I think, especially because there's such a focus with software development, it's tough to be like bouncing back and forth between whether it be different libraries, different tooling. So yeah, it's really not to knock anyone or knock any specific exam topic. It's just you pick and choose your battles. Oscar mentions at work, we do a different workflow. We create a branch for each feature and we merge it into a dev branch. After a period of time, usually 2 weeks, we create another merge request from dev to main, and we call it product release and increase the version on that. Yes. Yeah, Oscar. So what you do, that workflow is the most popular for sure. Mine, and I only say this because I'm coming from a team, like, we're less than 5. Okay. So like, that's like a good way just to put it in like perspective. And so I think it's called the GitHub workflow. I think, or GitHub flow. Yeah. I'm not saying like this is right in any way. So basically all it is you make a change and then you put it right back into the main branch. So like what you're saying is basically you have 2 branches in parallel. You have a main branch and a dev branch. All your changes go into the dev branch. That dev branch, I'm assuming, gets QA'd. And then once you're ready to release, you merge it into master or main, and then that's your quote-unquote release. So that, I would say, is definitely more popular. And Nick, definitely take what Oscar's saying, because that is that's just more and you could, and if you want proof, like, I think one of the best open source projects is Netbox. If you're ever like, I wonder how this works, or like, how does this work in the real world, this is definitely kudos to Jeremy Stretch for sure. Not to say like I said, it's not saying like, hey, this is the gold standard, like you have to look at this, but especially from a branching perspective, you could see the develop branch, as Oscar mentioned, and then they do have a master branch, and then you can see the different releases down here, and that's kind of basically where, like I said, develop and master merge for those different release cycles. But let me see. I don't know if there's a way to visualize the different branches. Let me see. So like, I was hoping that there was a way we could somehow visualize in GitHub, and maybe there is, I'm just not seeing it, where you could see like the tree, the visualization, if that makes sense, where you could see like when it was merged and whatnot. So like, as an example, right, I'm on master branch right now, and it's 21 commits behind develop, right? Because develop, like Oscar mentioned, is you're working toward, you're putting all your new changes in develop, and then when you're ready to merge and release a new version, that's where develop merges into the main branch. And you can see here, the last release was 17 days ago, and then the last commit was 17 days ago on master. And you can see it was a merge pull request from develop. So anyways, so Well, yeah, that's all I had though with the expert that I could think of. Like I said, I really don't have too many complaints about it. Like I said, I just want to see it mature and kind of see what other feedback is like. Maybe it's just me, right, with my sticking point, but we'll kind of see as more people take it. So, all right. Well, that was it for the expert level discussion, the DevNet expert level discussion. And if anyone in the chat, if you guys think of anything else, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'll definitely answer any question I can. Like I said, I'm not gonna break NDA or anything like that. But I definitely, if you have just general questions, I'm here for that. So let's see. Oh, I just realized on the stream. Let me see. I just realized that the chat wasn't showing up. Hold on, let me change that real quick or update it. We'll update the chat here. So that way you guys can see it. I try to read and make note of who says what in the chat, so that way everyone can follow along. But now in the stream, you guys should see the chat, just in case you want to follow along. All right. So now what we're going to do is, so I was trying to think, now that the DevNet expert studies are kind of over for now, on pause. Some cool things that I could do on stream that anyone interested with automation, software development, it would be entertaining for you. We may definitely dabble into networking. Like I said, it's still network automation at the end of the day. It still has that focus. But I'm really trying to take it to another level with the software development side, because I think there's only a select few people that basically beyond that, hey, I got a Python script, I can interact with an API, and here's some JSON output, or here's some XML, right? I want to dive a little deeper than that and actually create some sort of product or a tool that can actually help network engineers. And it integrates all that, right? I'm not saying it's not important, but I want to try to challenge myself a little bit to go a little further. So this is definitely still going to be a learning stream. I don't want that to go wrong. I'm not going to have any sort of, I may have some things planned out, but a lot of it will be just iterating over this project. So for those that are kind of newer to the stream or weren't with us back in last fall, I think this was October-ish, I was working on this project called NetCheck, and I'll zoom in a little bit because I know it can be tough to see on the stream, right? And it's a very basic concept. I'll put the GitHub link in the chat as well, just in case you want to see it yourself. Let me just check it out here. So just in case you're interested in checking it out yourself, it has 15 stars and 2 forks, so some people are interested. I'm surprised by it, and I'm glad there's some interest in it. I haven't touched this project up until this week. I haven't touched this project in, I think it said 8 months or something like that. It's the commit history, but anyways. So I tried to create a README for it months ago. Basically, I initially wanted to build it out as a network validation analysis tool. And it's not going to be something where it would replace your existing validation efforts or anything like that, right? I kind of aim this to be just steps above your average ad hoc scripts, right? I want something to where a engineer can install this, and I'm thinking about the deployment process. It'll probably be containerized, where you could spin it up and it will be all web-based. I might make a CLI companion with it, but it'll be all web-based. Your engineers could basically log on to it, the web portal, plug in a couple pieces of information, and it'll go out and create a report for you, and you'll be able to use it. Like I said, it's not groundbreaking. I want to preface with that. It's not anything like I'm going to sell to Google because it's never been seen before, or it's going to be in the metaverse or anything like that. This is purely just, can I do it? Like it's more of a, like I said, it's really a side project. Just I want to try to test my skills and just figure it out, right? So like, for example, one of the things I learned through this project so far, and this was, like I said, back last fall, was about code coverage. You might see this little 40%, this little badge here. And basically what code coverage is, I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but it's the amount of code that you have written tests for and the percentage, right? So right now you can see, and this is a cool utility, it's called codecov.io. This doesn't normally come with code coverage. Like code coverage is normally like a CLI printout report, or I think you can get it like XML. I think HTML is also an option natively, but I integrated my GitHub repository with this codecov.io because I think it's a really cool visualization. And you get this like sunburst diagram here. You can see a lot of it is not covered right now. All the red's not covered. The green is covered. And you see only about 40% of the project is covered. And it has a breakdown of the tracked number of lines of code and then how much are actually tested. So you see out of 440 tracked lines, 152 lines of code are tracked or covered by my tests. So yeah, like little stuff like this, right? Like things that obviously, like you see larger projects, like if you go to a larger project, you'll see like code coverage or you'll hear about code coverage. Well, I'm going to try to like learn about that and go as I build out this project. So like I said, from a functionality standpoint, it's not going to be anything groundbreaking. I hope it's very helpful for someone, right? And this is all going to be out there for anyone to grab. So don't think that, oh, Dan's going to make this really cool and then he's going to just all of a sudden it's going to disappear from GitHub overnight. This won't disappear from GitHub. I'll definitely keep it open source. And so it'll be very interesting for sure. All right. So I'm basically, this past week, I revisited this project because I was like, I want to start coding. I really want to get into a project where I'm excited and it gets me to come back to it, right? So initially, this README was I wrote it like I said last fall, and so I initially wanted to use PyATS for the validation piece and Batfish as the analysis piece, right? Because I was thinking, okay, here are my libraries that are kind of the foundation, and I'm going to build on top of those and make it easy for the average user to interact with. I think for now it's going to stay like that, but it may change in the future. So just keep that in mind. I think PyATS will stay. I still have to test Batfish a little bit and see kind of where I want it to fit in, like if it fits into this puzzle. But anyways, we'll keep going through like what the tool is. So it's built, it has a web UI and a RESTful API. So on the back end, everything's going to be API driven. My goal is to have it a full feature parity between the UI and the API. So I'm sure if you've studied for, I know like Nick, he's studied for the Dev Corps, and I don't know if they mentioned in any of the topics, but like a lot of products these days, some of them built a web UI before they built any sort of backend API. And so, and they're not, they may be older projects, right? They might be legacy and they're trying to build an API for the front end so that way you can programmatically interact with it. So my goal from the get-go is to have the API and any UI actions full feature parity. Nowadays, if you build a project, I mean, anything you buy, pretty much everything is what you see is, the marketing term API driven. It's because, that's kind of the way they're built, right? And it's not just because oh, it's cool, it's what the market wants. It is what the market wants, but you also have to think of it from an architecture standpoint, right? Microservices being as popular as they are, you have to have an API between all these different microservices. That's how they communicate. So it makes sense to build that API and then throw a front end on top of it, right? Because it just makes sense from that perspective. So, and like I just spoke about and talked about, is developers want that programmatic way to interface. They don't want to have to use a tool like Selenium or something to interact, like basically mock up a web interaction, right? A web UI interaction. You want to be able to just hey, give me my JSON XML payload, and then I can manipulate the data from there. So why you should use it, like I said, it's not gonna be groundbreaking, but I'm hoping that it will be used to help validate common changes and allow you to learn about your network that maybe you didn't know before. And then what's it built on? So this is actually kind of important, and this will definitely change. Hopefully just be added to, not removed. But the front end's going to be it's HTML, JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, and jQuery. I'm also integrating this really cool project called HTMX. And for those that aren't familiar with it, let me just pull it up real quick. It's for those, like for me specifically, I know enough JavaScript to be dangerous, but I don't know enough to like feel comfortable saying, hey, I know JavaScript. HTMX does this really cool thing where it utilizes Ajax. And for those that don't know, basically Ajax allows JavaScript to make backend communications, right? Think like your Git posts, that sort of thing, with APIs. And HTMX does that natively within the browser and will dynamically update the browser. So it does, instead of client-side rendering like JavaScript. So you're familiar with the web. You download your JavaScript, whatever's on the web page, directly from the server, and then that JavaScript lives in your browser. And if it needs to change things dynamically, it will do that because it all lives on your PC. HTMX kind of flips that and does server-side rendering. So it actually makes calls back to the server, and the server then returns what it wants the browser to do. So you'll see things here like, let me see. Let me go to an example because I think that's the best way. Let's see. Click to load. Right. No, that's not it. I'm trying to find one that's like, it'll be easy to understand. Let me click to edit. Apologize for the dog upstairs. I think he's been in these streams enough in the past too. He just is loud. All right. So let me just show you real quick. If you click to edit, right? So whenever I clicked on that button, it made a GET request to this resource. And you can see here the HTML, the response, right? That was from the server. So you can see more HTML. This is HTML code that loaded into the web browser. And this was a response from that GET request, right? So that, like I said, that server-side rendering where you say, hey, I want this to happen, and the server returns what the result is. So it's pretty interesting. Like I said, I don't want to bore everyone with it, but HTMX, it's newer, but it seems like it's gaining some traction just based on its simplicity. So the more interesting parts of the project, the backend. So it's built using Fast API and SQL model, which is actually created by the same maintainer or creator, I guess, of Fast API. So very good documentation for both these libraries. SQLite, SQLite. that's just the database I'm using right now. That totally can be like a Postgres in the future if this thing kind of builds out a little more. Like I said, with the validation, PyATS and Genie, and then the analysis, which is TBD, is where we'll be using Batfish. So yeah, that's a quick run through of the tool. And so let's take a look at the tool. Oh, it's still running good. Hold on. Let me just, before we get going any further, let me go over the tool, and then I have to recreate that Python virtual environment and install everything. Nick says, I'm guessing that Twitter is infinite scroll. Yeah. I don't know whether I doubt they use HTMX. I think they're probably like React or some other front. I really don't know. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I would say like lab it up and use their examples verbatim, and it's really cool because you, especially for someone that like Nick, I know you know like API interactions, right? Like how if you do a post request, right, you're creating something, a GET request, like you see that go back and forth when you create a Flask app and then use HTMX to interact, like to basically update your pages automatically. It's a pretty cool experience. It's much more rewarding and simpler than trying to figure out jQuery. So that's why I've started trying to use it more often. All right, so here's the homepage, and all this was built, like I said, a while ago. So just kind of a welcome screen. Here's the validation page. So my initial plan was to build out these little cards, and each card will take care of one specific use case, right? So, and I try to make it as basic as possible, something that would be common for really anyone across any organization. So my first two thoughts were a circuit upgrade and a switch install, right? There's a bunch of different checks that you should do that you may not always do when you do like a circuit upgrade or switch install, especially like adding a switch to an existing stack. A lot of people just do show switch, like on Cisco at least, show switch, and you see it added to the stack and, you know, in a ready state or whatever, and you're like, all right, cool, and then configure the ports and walk away. What this tool will allow you to do is plug in that host name, the operating system, and then the IP. So the IP, this box actually I'm going to be taking out probably because I'll be able to do some things on the back end that as long as your host name has a DNS record, an A record, right, that we can look up the host name and get the management IP, we could take out this box. But for now, figure just start with too much and then kind of pull back as needed. Nick says, I'm seeing that this YouTube chat is still slow to load new posts. Yeah, I don't know if it's me or if it's YouTube. I'm thinking it's me. I'm really trying to get on a new PC soon because as you saw, like when the stream started, like everything was lagging. Like I get it, like we're trying to compile a new Python interpreter, but I mean everything from opening up a new window, like everything just makes it this PC lag. So I think it's like 8 years old, so it's definitely about time to update it. So anyways, so the validation tab kind of has these specific use cases, and I tried describing like what happens for each check. So you'll see like verify the iOS version, the interface errors, the logging. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to be declarative in nature to where, like, for example, the iOS version, that can depend per device, per model, per organization. I need to figure out a robust way for you to put in this information without it being cumbersome, right? So I'm still trying to figure that out. Right now, it's just a bunch of static values on the back end. And then the analysis piece and the about piece are just under construction. So what we're going to take a look at tonight is something I just started working on this past week, and I'm very excited about it. it does a lot. I kind of push my limits with it. There's a lot that I'm introducing, so please bear with me. I may say things wrong. It may not be 100% correct, and it definitely won't be best practice, but I'm trying to push this tool a little more and trying to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. So bear with me as I'm going. Nick says, or I'm maybe being rate limited since I'm very chatty on your stream. I don't think so. I think the rate limiting and like the timeouts are only like for big streamers, like people with thousands of viewers or hundreds of viewers. I don't know if I even have that ability, to be honest with you. So, all right. So this is what I've been working on, and I'm calling it custom validation. Hopefully it loads. So this is a new page, and the purpose of this is, okay, we have our common use cases in this validation tab, right? And maybe this doesn't fit you. Maybe you're like, you know what, we're not doing a circuit upgrade, but I swapped out a module, right? A module on a router, like a line card or whatever, right? And I don't really need to go through and check all my BGP neighbors or whatever. Let's say or ping for external connectivity. So I created this page here where it's very customizable. So you can type in a name, and we can say test router 1. And then what I'll do over here is have the just high level tests that you'll be able to customize. And you can dynamically drag and drop from right to left. And then if you're like, let's say you accidentally, this is a bug on my part, but it's kind of neat. So let's say you accidentally carry one over. There's probably a way where I can code it to say you can only drag it over once. But let's say you accidentally drag OSPF routing over. I got this little trash can here. Boom. It's deleted. So yeah, and that way, if you want to clear it all out, you can do that. And I'm sure I can create like a clear all button here. But anyways, the purpose of this is for you to plug in a test, and I got to put in another field for a host name, but you can just, kind of a la carte pick and choose the test you want to run. So yeah, so it may not seem like a lot, and you're probably like, wow, that's uneventful, but there's a lot that goes in the back end here, like the JavaScript that's required to do the drag and drop. And then I'll show you on the back end what else I've done to make this kind of take on like a new venture. Nick asks, does it make a difference if it's classic iOS or iOS X or NXOS? Yes. So the only reason that it matters, and this kind of would go across any specific library, not just PyATS and Genie, but it has to deal with the parsers. So Genie requires you to specify an operating or an OS in the testbed file. So when you define the device, you have to define the operating system. So that way Genie knows what parsers to use. So yeah, that's the only crappy part. And the thing is, I'm sure there's a way, like when I build this out, to where I can have the tool recognize what operating system is ran based on like a model number. So like another thought that I had was, instead of having you plug in the host name and IP address, that we would have an inventory on the back end of this, right? A separate table. And when you fill out this form, when you start typing in the host name, like you want to do switch 1, it would have a drop down, right? That would pop up and say, did you like, here's all the switches with this host name, or, all the devices that match this host name. So it would kind of auto update as you type. So like those sort of things have crossed my mind too. And then within the inventory, it will define the operating system. And then that way you don't have to plug any of this information in. But you can kind of see like how the wheels are spinning already, like how we can make this better. But for now, I just want to get it working and then iterate. So, all right. So going back to the custom validation, like I said, the idea is, I initially had the idea of providing, I don't think it's going to work actually. Oh, there we go. Of providing more information within the box itself. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit. I apologize. I try to put in some more, but then I thought, like, okay, I don't want people just to type in like, well, with BGP, I would need to know neighbor1 equals, and then an IP address, right? Like, I want it to be more structured. And there's so many different variables within each of these tests that then I would have to edit each of these individual blocks. And I think that's kind of messy. I'd much rather put in some sort of declarative file or way that you can plug in, like, all CPU utilization should be below X percentage. And then BGP route information. I mean, to me, I think there's a better way of doing it. So I haven't got that far yet, but that's kind of in the works as well. Let's see. Nick, I mean, as far as the visible options in the dropdown. Oh, you're talking about the dropdown here. Yeah, I can add it if it makes a difference if it's classic. Oh, yes. So iOS versus iOS XE, it does make a difference because there's a lot of different commands for iOS XE that aren't included in iOS, vanilla iOS, and then that makes a complete difference with the parsers on the back end as well. David said site ID with inventory. Yeah, that's a good idea too. But that's kind of where I start blending, where I'm like, do I defer some of my inventory needs to other tools that do it better? For example, like a Netbox. You know what I mean? So like I'm struggled with that as well. Like, if I create a basic inventory, I think I need to create one no matter what. But if I create one, it'll be very basic, because if I try to cover, all the use cases, then you might as well just build yourself another tool that just does inventory very well, or another tool that like is common in organizations where they do use it for network inventory. So I've thought about that though. Yeah, kind of creating like a sites, different sites with inventory and then correlations and what. So I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot of new stuff for me too, because then I'm like, oh crap, how do I create the integration for it? So, all right. So let's switch over to the coding. Oh, I did not mean to open Postman. All right. So I think let me see. Which Python? All right, I'm not in any Python right now. Python version. I think it's Python 3.9.13. I wonder how I can reference it. Yeah, I don't need Postman right now. Nick brings up doing any input validation on that. Don't want someone's stuff getting compromised. Yeah, trust me, Nick. I got the laundry list of security things I need to work on. So no, to answer your question, I'm trying to think. I haven't looked at the templates in a bit, because you can do your validation with Bootstrap. And so like you can put in patterns like in the HTML, and like Bootstrap will help take care of that. But on the back end, I don't think so. I don't know. I have to look. But yeah, that's on the list to do. Nick says, I thought there was maybe a whole list of different versions. No, only reason there's a short list right now of just iOS XE is because it's just where I'm at in the project. I don't really have anything else as far as I don't have any other use cases right now besides iOS, iOS XE. I've come from the enterprise space, so like those are kind of my babies when it comes to the operating systems. And obviously like Nexus and XOS, I'm very familiar with. XR, I've honestly never really touched. So if I move on to another operating system, granted I'll have to create new test cases and test scripts for them, but that's probably what I'll move on to, is like a Nexus. All right, so let me figure out where my, user local lib. Okay. Right? No, it's just Python 3.9. Oh. Let me go into Python. Local lib. Please don't tell me it installed right next to my other one. Oh, this is the actual package here. Got one. Oh wait, no. Should be in bin. Just taking a look at the chat. Nick, off topic. Any interest in having a published number for like call-ins on the stream or HTML escaping? Oh, they're two different messages. Call-ins on the stream. So I've thought about hosting or like jumping in a Discord, like a Discord call, and just having people join if they want to while I'm streaming, and then we could chat. That's definitely a good topic, and I've been thinking about it for a while. So maybe I'll probably use one of the maybe I'll ask AJ or someone at Art of Network Engineering, use one of their breakout rooms, and just have people join if they want. So yeah, well, I'll definitely look into that. HTML escaping, yeah, like I said, I just haven't got to it. But yeah, I'm sure when the time comes. Dude. I'm trying to figure out where I can use it shouldn't be in lib. It should be in, I don't know. Hold on. It should be in bin. Oh, there we go. Python 3.9. Well, that's the thing though. Python 3.9. Yeah. User local bin. Python 3.9. Okay, so it did work. Okay. Alright. Sorry. Probably not what you wanted to see on stream, is me figure out what I'm even doing right now. Alright. But I have it figured out. That's the good part. So let's go to code, NetCheck, user local bin, Python 3.9. So basically, and I'll kind of explain as I'm going through, just in case if you join late or if you're just not sure what's going on. And I'm sure it's really hard to read. So basically, I had to compile a new Python interpreter from scratch because this WSL instance, it's all messed up. So basically, installed a new version of Python. I had to anyways. I had to update my Python 3.9 version anyways. So I that's what took so long, and that's why the beginning of this VOD and this stream was all kind of laggy. So I compiled it, and I couldn't find where it was compiled to. And so I found where it was compiled and made sure it was the right version. And now I'm basically executing, I'm using that interpreter to create a new virtual environment in my code repository. So that's what you see here. And I realize that I didn't remove the old one. So hold on. And then hopefully we'll get to code here soon. Okay, so the virtual environment has been built, and let me just make sure. All right, so I'm on the right version. Oh, hold on. Oh, it's using Python 3.9. Interesting. Why is it doing that? That's so weird. So this is my problem before, and this is probably just the way I compiled it, and I don't really have too much. I don't have enough time to recompile it on stream, and the stream would just be disgusting. So, like, the quality of the stream would just go downhill. So I'll have to look at this off stream. But yeah, basically, I think I just got to go through, remove all the existing versions of Python on here. Honestly, I might just build a new WSL instance just because this one's gone downhill pretty quick. But yeah, you can see like the user local bin Python 3.9 should be Python 3.9.13, and then 3.9.5 is what's active in the virtual environment. And you can see without me installing anything, and this is like an important lesson, I guess, is why you should always use virtual environments. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Appearance. Okay. Hopefully you can see now. So basically you could see activated the virtual environment, and I didn't install anything. And you see when I did pip list, I had all this junk already on it. And that's because I accidentally one time installed all of this in the system installation. So anytime I create a virtual environment off that system installation, I get all this crap with it. The problem is now if I want to install like a project that has other libraries unrelated and there's a conflict with a dependency, then I have to manually go through and like resolve all those. So it just stinks. But anyways, I do have it up and running. The problem is I can't run what I wanted to earlier. So on the back end, and I wish I could show this to you, I basically got it configured, and you can kind of, if you've read the code, you probably like, okay, I get it. I got Redis up and running. So it's a message broker and a key value store. So it's really good with basically helping you queue up tasks. So with Redis, I'm using the what's the right word for it? Message queuing system, I guess. RQ. No, Python. Job queue. I don't know why I said message queue. So Redis queue, RQ for short. So basically, Redis is the broker that would send the jobs to the job queue, and you can use RQ. Celery is another very popular option. What is else? Rabbit MQ, I believe. Anyways, there's a bunch of different job queues. I actually found RQ because I was going to use Celery, and looking at Stack Overflow forums, everyone was like, hey, if you're already using like Redis or familiar, just use RQ. It's just easier. So I went down this route, and dude, it's so easy. It really is. And so basically the point and why I'm doing it is so that way I can start running multiple tasks at once, and run multiple jobs. So think of it almost as like a concurrency, but they're unrelated jobs, if that makes sense, right? So anytime I press save, right? So it's specifically only for custom validation. So I was testing it. The thought behind it is, okay, what if someone is like, hey, I want to spin up a job, and I've created this big custom, let's say it's like 15 tests deep, and all I have to do is change the host name and press run. Let's say that those 15 steps are common amongst 10 different devices I want to test. You can keep everything on this page as is, and then just press the save button. Well, it says save now, but I'll change it maybe to like run test or something. You'll click that, and in the background, it will spin up a job that will run that PyATS, that test case for you, right? And so that way you have workers that spin up that run those tests for you, and it offloads the work. So, a common thing that you learn about, especially in DevCore, is synchronous versus asynchronous programming. So synchronous is, like here, if I was to type in everything and press submit, the page would stop and start spinning, right? Because you have to wait for a response with synchronous. Async is, hey, my programmer recognizes, or Python recognizes, hey, this job's going to take a while. Just let it do its thing, but let's move on, right? Let's go to the next test case or the next item to process. So async does get a little wonky as far as like you have to understand, like you don't want to get lost in the sauce, but it's something I've always been interested in, and I'm not necessarily using like async IO or anything like that. All I'm doing is just spinning up different jobs and different processes, but it's helping me understand, like, okay, because all I've known up to this point is just synchronous programming, right? I click one button on a web front end, I sit there, wait, results come back. Okay, cool. So I'm trying to like slowly get in the mindset of, if I click submit, there's another process that kicks off in the background, a worker process that is doing a job for me, and I can still navigate to other pages on my website, and maybe spin up another job somewhere else. So I'm still trying to get like that in my head, like figure out, okay, how can I do that? And just wrap my head around it. So yeah, that was I was hoping to like demo all of that, and I'll be able to demo some of it here. But so for example, right, let me go ahead and I'm going to click the save button 3 times. Actually, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it 3 times, and I'll change the name of the test. Okay. So I'll do it once, change the test name. Let's say, like I said, let's say I want a router and test OSPF, BGP, and the environment. So that's 2. Change the test name again to 3. Press save. Now if I go to my logs, you'll see in the logs, right, some data that's sent. So this data here is actually sent via via JavaScript. JavaScript sends a post request to the backend. I think it's post to the backend with all this data, right? And this data then gets ingested into the job, and the job then can say, okay, well, I know what the user wants, right? The user wants the test name to be this, and then here's a list of tests, right? And that's where I can then go in and say, okay, well, if it's an environment test, given this value, this string value, then we'll run against this test script, and so on. So all of that gets to the back end, it gets processed, and then each of these tests spin up a worker. So anytime it says job is being processed, there's the job gets added to the queue, which is that RQ tool I was showing, and then a worker picks up the job from the queue and runs it in a separate process, and then reports it back to the queue. The queue is what allows the Python, like my program, to get the results back. The queue kind of manages it all, right? Otherwise, you have to worry about like process, like orphan processes. You got to worry about like process management, where I don't have to do that with a job queuing tool like RQ, right? I can just say, hey, whenever that job comes back and says it's done, whether it's good, pass, fail, give me the results, and then I'll use those results and either store them in a database, or you wouldn't want it really stored in memory, but basically a database, or return it to the user, however. All right, so there's a couple questions. I know it kind of went on there's a lot to ingest there. Nick says, I hope it doesn't violate NDA. Was any knowledge of Linux scripting needed / helpful during the lab? Thinking of Nick Russo's example of makefiles for linting testing and then maybe pipeline deployment. I will say, yeah, so like Nick Russo's example is like a perfect example of understanding Linux. Because, yeah, like in makefiles, you have to understand a little bit of Linux scripting. So I would say, yeah, like in that context for sure, because there's no hiding that GitLab is used and CI/CD pipelines are on the exam topic. So, you'll definitely, and Linux, you use a Linux box as your GitLab runner. So you'll want to definitely know a little bit of Linux scripting. Is Redis open source freeware or pay to use? From my understanding, it's open source. The database, right? Yeah. So let me show you what whenever I'm referring to Redis, so that way. Yeah, I think they have a paid version as well. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess they do have a paid version. Yeah, they have like it's kind of, it reminds me a lot like Ansible, where there's like a enterprise, like they say, enterprise grade. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's open source. I think it's on GitHub maybe. Yeah, yeah, it's open source. I don't know. I'm assuming this is all the code. But yeah, so it's open source. And then they have, like you saw, the enterprise grade. But yeah, they mention it as like a database, an in-memory database. But it can also be used as a message broker, which is what I'm using it for. So, and probably the next stream I'll go over and maybe have a diagram ready, so that way you can kind of see the flow. I know talking about it is one thing, but actually seeing a flow, it'll probably make more sense. But yeah, basically Redis. Let me show you. I'll just show you the code here at the top. So, I think everything's defined in here. Yeah, so I literally just followed an example. So I'm not ashamed to say that. I just followed an example for this code here. But basically, we define a Redis URL variable, which for me, all I did, and if you're interested in doing this yourself, is to create or spin up a Redis Docker container. So let me just show you real quick. I actually have mine spun up here. So you'll see like it's just the Redis image. It's a small image. Just spin it up. You can do Docker run. Just make sure to expose port 6379. I think that's like the well-known port for Redis, the default port. But just make sure it's exposed to your system. And yeah, then all you do really is you create a connection to Redis using that URL. So you basically just say, okay, here's the URL, and then create the Redis object. And that's what I did here back in main. I created a queue object, which is from the RQ library, which is the job queuing. And then the argument is the connection, which is a Redis object. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm not trying to confuse you in any way, but basically the Redis queue needs to have a connection to Redis, so that way it knows like, hey, I don't know how to get the messages, right? Or where do I put my jobs? Like, where's the queue to put the jobs? And there's a bunch of different ways, or a bunch of different settings that you can do within the queue object. So, for example, I have this listen here, this listen variable, and it's a list of just default, but you can create different queues for different job types. So you could say low, high, medium. I think that's in the example in the documentation. So you can create different queues for your different jobs. So let's say I have a job like sending an email confirmation, right? Probably can put that in a lower queue. But then maybe there's something to where, like a credit card payment, right? You probably want to put that job in a higher queue because that's more time sensitive and obviously much more important than an email. I mean, an email is important, but when you put it up against like a credit card transaction, you don't want the user to be sitting there. I don't know if you guys have ever been on websites where it's like, don't refresh this page when you do a payment, and it just sits there, and it sits there for like, I've been on there to where I'm like, do I refresh? Because I sat there for almost like 45 seconds to a minute. And I'm like, is it really taking this long to like actually do the transaction? But maybe a lot of times it could be the job queue on the back end is backed up, or they just don't have enough resources, right? So who knows? But yeah, this is a cool little job queue tool. Like they mentioned, and you could read forums, Stack Overflow forums. It's very simple to get started. So that's most the reason why I picked it, and I'm familiar with Redis, because it only works with Redis, right? It's called the Redis queue, so there's not much flexibility with it. Whereas like a Celery, you can integrate with other message brokers and everything like that. So yeah, it's interesting, for sure. But yeah, I apologize. I really wish I had my Python interpreters were, my Python installations were correct and weren't all messed up, because then I could show you like a live example of like the workers. So like right now, as an example, when we do a post, and I just called it custom post as the endpoint. I'll just show you real quick. So this will be kind of like the last thing I'll wrap up with. So custom post is I'll get the request, the body of the request, and so like I said, it's actually an XML HTTP request object from JavaScript. JavaScript will send that, right? And so I'll extract the test names from the data, and just for those that are like interested, I think it's the DevNet Associate. They talk about serialization and deserialization, and you're like, oh, like it's just different data types like JSON or XML. So when you're dealing with different languages and different parts of an application, you start really understanding that a little more. So like here as an example, I got the request body back in bytes, in a byte string, right? And for those aren't familiar with byte strings, it's just it's just a bunch of different characters, right? So I actually had to decode the byte string into a Python dictionary. Well, I decoded it to a Python object, right? That ended up converting to a Python dictionary. So it's crazy when you start like, oh wow, those were bytes on the wire, right? So like you're starting to understand like, okay, serialization, like I get it now. Like I'm starting to understand like how the different parts interact, and how different data types, I guess, interact. Nick asked, does it make sense to create a swarm of Redis, your app front end and back end, and other needed systems? Trying to get a better understanding of how to use Docker overlay / swarm networking with services. I mean, probably. So I'll say this, Nick. I definitely I see that your head's more on kind of the design and architectural side, right? And right now I'm more focused on just kind of building like almost like an MVP, right? Minimal viable product. So a minimum viable product, sorry. And so like I'm not really to the deployment or the kind of the architectural side, but yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar with Docker Swarm. I've kind of just rocked with Kubernetes. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation though. Like how you can deploy this in how would you deploy it? How would you break it up, right? Because right now, like you have to think, I have Fast API. I'm using UVcorn as the HTTP server, like for development. And then I'm using in production, I would throw Nginx in front of it, right? To do some reverse proxy and be able to route the different requests, and so there's like a lot that goes into it. So not dodging your question, one I don't know enough about Docker Swarm, so I'll just throw that out. Two, like that is more kind of architectural, and there's a lot to consider with that. And honestly, I don't even see the full picture yet, right? I mean, I even mentioned in the beginning, like adding an inventory module and figuring out like how we can integrate that. So, yeah, I'm kind of just winging and going just one step at a time, if that makes sense. Or would putting them all in the same network make more sense? Yeah, I mean, once again, I think that goes back to the architectural discussion on what services. Once you have a layout of all the services, then you have a better understanding of what needs to talk to what, and then, okay, should these be isolated in different networks and so on. So, hey Marcus, how are you doing? Glad you're here. Hope you're doing well. But we're just kind of going over this project. Haven't really. It's been kind of a fail because for whatever reason I can't get my Python virtual environment up and running. So kind of just walking through the code, and then the next stream next week, I'll be actually diving more into the code, and we'll be adding, like, you see all these little to-do comments. We'll be attacking some of those in the next stream. But yeah, so for right now, basically I grab the body, and by the way, this is what that body looks like down here. I've printed out to the log. So it's basically a dictionary with a key of test name and a key of tests, and then the value is the actual test name, and then a list of tests. And then I do a little bit of error checking. Like I said, this isn't anything big. And Nick, I'm sure that you'll like this comment. You might not be able to read it, but it says figure out better way to validate data. So trust me, I have been thinking about it. So we do a little bit of error test checking to make sure that the form data wasn't empty, because otherwise then the whole form would or the whole test script would kick off with no data. And then lastly, we go down, we generate a test bed. I just used a bunch of the Cisco, the always on CSR that's in the always on sandbox. I just hard coded it because I haven't added the form values yet, and there's a lot that goes with that. I got to make sure I want to make sure I add all the right form values and I don't add too much. So that's a whole other thought process. But for now, I just added static values to build the test bed. And then I basically add or create a job, and this is that queue variable. It's not really that descriptive, but basically that's that queue object from up here, from that redis queue object. So all we do is call the endQueue method to basically say, all right, hey, I have a job, and then run this function, and then the job timeout's 3 minutes. So because we're polling network devices, like we're interacting with a live network device, and as everyone knows, latency, we don't know what could be going on. I just I forget what the job timeout is by default, but I just put it as 3 minutes. I'm like, after 3 minutes, it should time out and say, hey, it failed. So it runs this run network test function, which if we look at that real quick, I put that in just a file called tasks. And you can see here, we go through and we run a PyTS job file. And in here, it's all hard coded for now. This definitely needs to be changed. But it just runs the circuit job file for right now. And then it parses through the results, and we actually store those results in our database. So if we go back to here, if we go back to this method, we fill out the form, we get the form data from the front end, right? It gets posted to this endpoint. We use some of that form data, like the test name and the list of tests, to identify what tests need to be run, or we will use that. Right now it's all hard-coded. We then put the job in our queue with a timeout of 3 minutes. It runs the job for the specific job file that we are calling out, which, like I said, this is dependent on the inputs. I still got to figure that part out to remove all this hard-coded data. Once this job file runs, the data, pass or fail, will be stored in the database. And for right now, it's just a SQLite database. It'll be stored in that database. And the idea is we'll have a separate results page that then you'll be able to go to and identify, make it searchable and look up the test name and look up the test results. And for those that are interested in what the database looks like, let me see. I think I have it open anyway. There we go. All right, cool. So I want to make sure I have that. The SQL Viewer extension in VS Code is awesome, by the way. I know there's a couple other ones too that I've used, but just quick shout out to it. So you have the name of the test. Like I said, this is the name of the test right now is all hard coded. But let me actually do that so that way you can have a better view, hopefully. So we have the name of the test, the time it was executed, the success rate, and this is a percentage. It's obviously in the database as an integer, but it's really your percentage. The total number of tests that were run, the number of tests that passed, the number of tests that failed, and then there is a test ID. I don't know, maybe this is just the way the model was defined, but the test ID is the primary key, and that's at the end. And you can see that's a sequential number here. So we have all this data to pull from. So ideally, my thought is, okay, we're to the point where we're storing data. Now we have to be able to extract it and then allow the user to look up their specific tests that they ran. And so there'll be a multitude of ways of doing it. I actually really liked John Capobianco's. He did a live stream recently where he used data tables. And I know he's been an advocate of it for a while, but all the built-in functionality that data tables has, where you can do like the filtering and the searches within the columns, I think I want to do something like that for the results page, because then you can just view all the tests that ran. And I'm sure I've already kind of thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, we could in the future have like, RBAC controls to where like you can only view the tests that you've ran, that you're the owner of. But I don't know. I'm still, like I said, that's like, there's so much that goes into it that you're like, okay, try to dial it in and just what you can make yourself for right now. And then we'll kind of add to it as we go. But, yeah, I've definitely thought about, because that would be another column in this table. It would be like owner or something like that, right? Owner of the test. And so that way, like for right now, it would just be one person, but like, how could we identify the owner of the test? So, but that's all TBD. Nick said, still doing one stream a week then? Yeah, for right now. Yeah, I'll probably just be doing one stream a week. I will be working on this project on the side. So if I start getting in a good groove of like a time to like a development, I may like flip on the stream one night and I'll just put something out there whenever I do decide, like if I'm like, you know what, I'll be spending 2 hours, 3 hours coding. I might just turn on the stream, and maybe that's where I'll also like open up a Discord room or, chat. So that way people can drop in and, we can talk, or you can ask questions as I'm going through the code or whatever. So, but yeah, planned streams, I'm just going to stick with the one stream a week. I think it works for now. Marcos, I'm late. Did you talk about your DevNet exam to the stream? Yeah, so I did. You could probably go back in the stream, but I warn you, it's definitely choppy. I had a lot of computer issues, I guess I'll call it, at the beginning. So the video is very choppy, but the audio should be there if you're interested in that. But yeah, I mean, I would give you a highlight, but there's really not like a 1 or 2 word answer to that. We had a pretty good discussion on that earlier in the stream. I think, and to give you like more of a specific point, I think like 10 minutes in, maybe we started talking about it, Marcos. 5 to 10 minutes in. I don't know. Might have been closer to 8. 18 minutes sticks out too. So, hey John, glad you're able to make it. Awesome stuff as always, Danny. Keep up the great stream, and thanks for the shout out. Of course, John. Of course. Kidding? Of course. And you keep up your streams. I've been watching your streams, so I'm glad to see some of the things you've been up to, especially with Ice and your what did you call it, icicle or something like that. So glad you're here though. Thanks for joining. Nick says, keeping any snapshots of these tests for viewing later, or is it only kept in memory on the DB that gets lost after a bit of time? No, I mean, that goes Another good question, Nick. I'm just not that far yet. No, it's honestly, it's really bad. Like as far as like single point of failure, like if I delete this file right now, it's all done. But I'm not too worried about it because I'm just in development. But yeah, in the future, I picture where I could use like Postgres and keep that separate, right? And then I would just have a connection string out to it. Because right now, like if you check out, I think it's up here. Oh, it might be in my DB file. Yeah, I mean, you can see here, like, so if I want to change this to a Postgres, I would just change this URL. Instead of being SQLite or SQLite, I would change it to a Postgres address, and I could point it to like another container or whatever. But the good news is that's all I have to do, right? And I mean, if there's any other additional parameters with Postgres, but like I have this built out to where just give me the URL to the database, and then I'll create an engine, and then from there we just create a session and be able to read and write data. So yeah, but yeah, to answer your question, no, I don't have anything. It will get lost, and I've done it before too because I've made database changes, like added columns or anything like that, and I don't know any sort of native migration tools with SQLite, so I just delete the file and just start over. But yeah, so all right, that's all I really had. I mean, like I said, I really wanted to demo this for you, and I know I kind of did, but it's really cool to see because I was kind of load testing it. When was that? A couple nights ago, and when you like smash on the save button, right? Because remember, clicking on this, where'd it go? The save button here. I'll just change the name. Will kick off another or queue, like kick off another job to get queued. Let me find it here. Yeah, see, like test router 4 test name, and then these tests. Like it's really cool to watch because that RQ tool that I was showing you, you can actually watch the workers pick up the job from the queue. Let me see if I can find it for you just real quick, and I'll zoom in. I know this writing definitely you can't look at for too long. This is working with the queues, the worker results, or jobs maybe. They had a really neat RQ info. No, that's not it. Jobs, results. Man, that stinks. I can't find it. But anyways, there's this CLI command called RQ info, and it will actually show you all the jobs in the queue. Like you'll have a little loading screen, and it'll be like 4 jobs in your queue, and then it'll have a list of workers, and it'll say whether they're busy or idle. Maybe it's under here. No. Shoot. Workers, maybe? I was already under here. Anyways, yeah, so that'll be for another time. Oh, here it is. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit. There we go. So it actually comes with this, you can install a RQ dashboard. It's another package or library, and integrate it right in your app. And it gives you a nice little, like, hey, this is the different queues. Here's the workers. And then here's the jobs that are currently running, like in like a nice web format. And that's like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to add the endpoint and then point it to the dashboard. But this is through the command line. It will show you all the different queues, the number of jobs in the queues, and then tell you, and then these are all the different workers down here, and it'll tell you what queues that they're watching. So you can see this one's just monitoring the low queue, this one's doing the high, default, and low, and then the third worker's doing just the default queue. So it's very neat. I mean, for being a simple little tool, it's a pretty awesome tool. So Nick says, I'm asking for my own knowledge and to validate that what I'm saying is still correct, not trying to call you out or anything. Oh, no, I trust me. I don't take it as calling me out. I've thought about everything that you've said so far tonight. I've thought about, and I just like, I'll get to it. Only because, like I said, it's a work in progress, and it's really like a project to help me learn. I'm trying to dabble with some async and looking at, creating this, whole message queue, this job queue, worker workflow. So it's a lot of new stuff, and it's definitely not like it may not be mind blowing to anyone, but it's definitely helping me learn like that, kind of like how you slowly progress from creating your first script to creating your first like Flask application, right? Something very simple, but it's still like a step up from just like, hey, I learned how to enter SSH to a network device and run share run, right? Like it's just like little steps. So yeah, no, I don't take it. I'm taking no offense to it. I'm glad you kind of do call it out, because there are some things that you've mentioned that I need to take into consideration, especially down the line if I do plan to be publicizing it more. But all right, well, I know the stream, I'm a little behind, or the stream's a little behind, so I'll wait a few minutes. But if anyone has questions, anything else related to this project we're working on, the DevNet Expert, definitely here to answer them. And if you think of something later, obviously I'm on Twitter, so you can always hit me up on there too. Oh, and this is pretty cool too. I was using this the other day. You can use this interval flag, and basically what it does is in your terminal, it just sits there and refreshes every, in this case, every second. And so like you can watch in real time. I mean, this is going back to something else I just said. You can watch that worker monitor the queue, pick up the job from the queue, and then if you have the worker open in a separate shell, you can watch it execute the job for it. Like, in our case, a PyTS test script. You can watch it execute it in its own process and then return the results. It's very cool. Nick says, I consider myself an HTML noob. I hope those skills aren't too required in a dev role for a company. If it is, there goes another topic to study. Yeah, no, I don't worry about that, Nick. I think, at least for me, the reason I've kind of looked at creating like web interfaces and like web tools and that sort of thing, I found that as like a low-hanging fruit, and because there's frameworks out there like Flask, like Django, they're very easy to pick up, and you can reap the rewards pretty quickly. And it's and web tools, no matter like who you're talking to, they're very accessible, right? So like you can spin up a web server and you don't have to ask anyone to download anything. You don't have to say, hey, do you have Python installed on your system? Do you have Docker? Like, you don't have to worry about any of that. All you say is, hey, I spun up this, I got this script working. I put a web front end on it. Just go to this URL and fill out the form, or go to this web URL and click this button, right? So that's the main reason I started with web stuff, creating web apps versus like a CLI app or anything like that. But I'm starting definitely like after using like Click, like studying for the DevNet Expert and like going through like the Click library, Typer, and some of these other ones, Rich. well, rich is kind of supplement, but yeah, it's very interesting. There's a lot. It opens your eyes to a lot of stuff. So when you realize all the different ways to consume an application, you're like, oh my gosh, like you got the web, you got a CLI application, you can download, like you can create a GUI like using Kinter, I think that's how you pronounce it, where like you literally have a UI that, like a binary that you can install, right, you know, for Windows or Mac or whatever. Like it's crazy. So well, I think that is how we're gonna wrap it up. Next time we will have so next time I plan to do another NetCheck, like demo, and we'll get, like I said, we'll get to coding. I'll figure out all this technical stuff. We'll go through, we'll start knocking out some tasks that I need to do, and we'll kind of just go from there. We'll probably stick with this for a little bit. I'm also going to be working on, probably starting later next week, probably the following week, in a couple weeks, I'm going to be learning Go. So like Golang. So if you guys are interested in that, please let me know. If you'd be interested in kind of watching me learn it per se, like basically doing exercises and kind of walking through the different ways, you know, learning it from scratch, data types, compiling, like all that stuff, right? So if you're interested, if you'd be interested in seeing that, I definitely don't mind streaming that. So that'll be something else I'm kind of working on. So yeah, those will be my two main focuses: this, building out this tool a little more, and then learning Go. So all right, well, that is it. Thanks again for everyone that's tuned in. I know we had a lot to talk about tonight, and I'm glad everyone was able to join. And barring any other technical difficulties, for next week, we will be back at the same time, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and we'll probably be diving into this NetCheck project again. So till then, feel free to message me on, hit me up on Twitter, or yeah, that's probably the best place you'll find me. Thanks again, and talk to you soon. See ya.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on